Hey.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you guys?
All right.
So, how is everyone today?
Good.
Good.
We basically potentially discussed just going through the paper again. The Bergson, Robbins, is it Robin or Robbins paper?
Stephen Robbins?
Yeah. I have a couple brief other things to say before then, but if anybody else wants to say, you can speak now or hold your comments. For the moment, a few things that I wanted to share. One, I had the privilege of going to this talk. It was really good. It was sort of a Halloween, spirit of Halloween talk about body horror or like horror in general. But Eric Leonardis is someone that I've known via the internet for a couple of years now. Would drop cool stuff about cybernetics and phenomenology and stuff like that. So I seen a few of his talks in the past, but I actually got to attend this, and this is really, really, really fun, but also really, really, really. It was so nice to just unabashedly see the philosophy woven in, the history, and it's not unexpected from Eric, but it's just I always feel like I want to see more and more of that happening, and it was just great, really nicely done. He also mentioned someone we can maybe look into, Manuel de Landa. I think we talked about him somewhat, but I don't quite remember. But basically, he's done a lot with philosophy and very open about cybernetics and cognitive science. I basically asked in the chat, and I do think it is going to be available on YouTube at the Neurohumanities Network. But I asked, like, hey, like, do you know any filmmakers that were using? I didn't mention the Martini critique that kind of led from the Varela and lab and cognitive science. I mean, Nunez stuff. But Martini's critique of that was like, whoa, using film stuff. So I kind of asked, what about filmmakers that do XYZ stuff? If you again mentioned Yolanda, who intentionally did a lot of things using film and whatnot, which is cool. Maybe a big more on that later. I had a few other quick things. I had a kind of grant writing workshop this week that I attended that was interesting. I'm continuing to explore that space, but more about that later. But then I also, I'll save this for last. I was looking for a way to group annotate a PDF again. I know we've done this many, many different times. This is just a tarot, but I don't think we've ever really used Hypothesis. We looked at it a few years ago. I don't know if any of us have ever used it, but it looks kind of cool. But I don't know. We'll see. We're not going to use it today. But then I wanted to mention this podcast series and how massively impressive I've been by it. Impressed by being, and why is because it's philosophy, but it's a lot of philosophy of history of science. I kind of actually found it because I was looking for something around here, like Fisher. Yeah, I wanted to get to this, but in trying to find this, I was scrolling past, like, on YouTube, all these playlists, and I was like, oh, okay. So I kind of found, I don't know which one it was. Something around here. Maybe a little bit earlier. But I got into, I got into here from Derrida and words, logical positivism to Foucault. There's been just a lot of really interesting things that have come up, things that are relevant to cognitive science or to cognition futures, and very relevant to frontier map. Like this, these aren't put in the context of history of or like history philosophy of science necessarily, but it's the explicit commentary on that from logical positivism, which is kind of related to empiricism and the stuff that the teleology paper was getting at. Like I didn't touch upon that at all in my blog post, but the logical positivism movement in the early parts of the 19th century and such were super related to everything. And I wasn't using that term necessarily, but suffice to say, this is kind of, these are sort of, French critical theorists and stuff like that. But there's a lot of connection to the, like Foucault's work is a lot of how science and knowledge is made too, and commentary on that. So even though he's addressing from a philosophical viewpoint, there's quite a lot of narrative work being done here, and a lot of context that's being done for that fits, like it's sort of philosophy, maybe humanities take on. We talk a lot about the AI wonders and summers, but there's a little bit more of the idea and cultural work behind that too, which I found really interesting. So big shout out to Philosophize. Honestly, I think I've said this many times, well, many times recently, but maybe not enough overall. I haven't really enjoyed exploring philosophy very much. Like I kind of, when I had to take undergraduate, requirement kind of a course, I took a philosophy course, and I was like, oh yeah, philosophy and like religion is like philosophy of religion or something like that. And I was so disappointed. I'm like, man, I don't want to. I care about these ideas. I don't want to talk about it this way at all. It was so off-putting for me. But the teleology paper and doing stuff on that, and then finding these ways of talking about it are much more appealing. So I'm actually quite excited about that, and have some ideas for frontier map that could be quite interesting ahead, and some other things. So that's my brief update on that. I'm going to try to figure out the best way to set up this. I might change my screen sharing, but in the any questions or comments while I'm fiddling around with screens again.
No, it's funny how much an intro to philosophy class can be hit or miss, though. Like just because it's obviously there are like almost infinite options from which the professor has to choose to curate the syllabus. There are so many different ways of approaching it. And
Honestly, also
depending on what you select, it can be so different. Then depending on how you present it, it can be so off-putting.
I honestly also think it was just sort of like a bad personality compatibility too. Like I think if it was also kind of just another like someone who basically talked about it more like how I want to talk about it. And that's almost childish to say it that way, but I think you're completely right in that, Amanda. And I wish someone was there to kind of say, hey, you can look at the same stuff with different lens and let different like approach, and it's still valid. Because I didn't know it. I was totally like, I thought, oh, I don't belong here. And that's why I'm very particular about like mentoring in general too. Like you got to have someone to say, look, if you care about this stuff, all you really need to do is find the right commentator and basically community to explore it, and you can be part of the conversation too. And I didn't have that experience, so I'm kind of glad to find like legitimate reasons to give a damn, even going back like, and you get what I'm saying. At any rate, any other comments before we go on to this? I think Bradley requested we recap some things, which maybe we can do quickly. I think we were about page 18 last we left off. So I don't know if we want to say anything else before that.
One question I had that I asked last time was like, how metaphorical is this hologram stuff? How much do the details matter? Like, how familiar do you actually have to be with how holograms supposedly work in order to understand this? And so yeah, like how metaphorical is it? And the answer seems to be like not at all. I didn't highlight the passage, but somewhere in starting at page 19, that section, he says like, you know, it's a physical wave, like the brain is physically resonating. In the same line, he says something about symbol manipulation and how that level of talking about things is just it's unnecessary. So the answer is it's yeah, not metaphorical at all. What the brain is doing is acting as this resonating way. I forget the technical term from hologram theory. But I thought that was interesting because it links things back to previous conversations about resonance and what that can mean, but also about like the continuity from, we framed it as like from third personal to first personal, or from physical to mental. So if what the mind is doing is this physically describable process fundamentally, then that evades the hard problem in a sense, maybe.
Resonance across time. Yeah, I'm trying to find what you were referencing specifically. I'm not sure which. I have all these. I don't know if you can see them, but oh yeah, I don't know which quote, which part, but yeah, I get what you're saying overall.
If you search symbol manipulation,
Cool.
It was just before he said something about that.
It entails a very concrete physical dynamical state as concrete as a resonating violin string or even bridge between the wind. Abstract symbol manipulation has nothing to do with this and can achieve something like this. This brain supported resonance is with the flow of the event. It's self-structured by those invariance laws, and it is this structure that allows us to get more precise than Sheldrake's morphic resonance.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. He explicitly says it's, yeah, concrete.
Kind of cool. Like I was trying to find a way. I don't think Zotero offers this group annotation, but we were both in here able to make this sometimes be really cool over here inside. Anyway, also hi Morgan. Yeah, that was one of the questions we had. I'm trying to think kind of where we like our broader summary of things in the past. Just to look at the abstract. Is it up here? No, it's only here. Look at the abstract quickly. In discussions on consciousness and the hard problem, there is an unquestioned background assumption, namely our experience is our experience stored in the brain, or is assuming that it is. Bergson argued that this very question is the critical issue in the problem of consciousness. His examination of the then current memory research led him, save for motor or procedural memory, to a no answer. Others for example, Sheldrake, who we just mentioned, have continued this negative assessment of the research findings. So has this assumption actually been proven since Bergson? Do we know how experience is stored or that it is stored? Here, a recent review. How long ago was this? Okay, so 4 years ago. A recent review and model of memory is examined to see whether this assumption actually stands. Where it stands. Again, the assessment will be that nothing has changed. The core of the problem, it will be argued, lies in two things. First, the search for how, where experience is stored is motivated, praising Bergson, that in classic metaphysics, a framework on space and time whose logic cannot be coherently logically adhered to in attempting to explain how experience is stored. Okay. And secondly, the search generally assumes an inadequate theory of perception that is implicitly based in this classic metaphysics. If framed within Bergson's model of perception and his temporal metaphysics, conjoined with Gibson's model, the stored search appears misguided from the start. So maybe we can rephrase this a little bit. Basically, I remember one of the questions I had before is he basically saying, like, instead of Gibson's I'm blanking out on that. Do we want to say anything about the abstract or any of the like broad commentary on things to start?
Maybe we revisit what the classic metaphysic is supposed to be. If I'm remembering right, it's that the way to think about time is as a series of moments. But Bergson thinks that even that is too much. Like even that's wrong. You can't break time down into a series of timeless things. Time has to be. It's more fundamental. It's the shift from one point to the next that is really fundamental. Yeah, you. The point is you can't make sense of the present as being just one point without extension. And then so before you even talk explicitly about memory, if our perception of the world in each present moment seems to be, continuous, there's a flow from one moment to the next. We have short term, maybe that's not the technical term for it, but like a melody, the present moment is defined by the immediate past, and it's the series that's meaningful. So he thinks that before you start talking about memory and you're just talking about perception, you're kind of already talking about memory.
Yeah, like I think I like one of my questions last time, that was basically, so is Gibsonian information and direct perception basically direct memory then? And is perception at the time of we're doing it already memory? And yes, that kind of okay. Gibsonian cubes. Did we talk about them? Like, did you mention them before, Bradley? I forget.
What was that?
Gibsonian cubes.
No, I don't think so. What is that?
Um.
Oh, Gibsonian cube. Oh, this is probably like a stimulus, the rotating cube. We've not talked about it though in the group.
That's not familiar.
Is a partition set of flow fields, the size flowing towards away from the observer, a radial flow field on its top. From this perspective, the edges and vertices are simply sharp discontinuities at the junctures of these flows. The features are then are creatures of the flows, and they can disappear. It does not exist in a static instant to be bound in a static cluster. These features are clustered into complex events. The rotating cube already a complex event. I wonder if we can
find a visualization. That'd be good.
Yeah.
So the main point is that the features that matter depend on time. They depend on changes through time.
I didn't see anything easily, but yeah, it's sort of a yeah. I don't think we talked a whole lot about this section before, or I was well, I didn't really absorb a lot of things. Okay. Yeah. We're considering a conscious experience, aka dynamic perception, and already we are in the midst of a problem memory. But yet there's a startling surprise per my initial quote from Moscovich et al. All of the above is bound together with a feeling, phenomenology, of experience in the HPC. We would hope that the phenomenology of coffee stirring, perhaps along with fairies and unicorns, is not just sitting around somewhere waiting to be bound all this neural activity, but this is the author's acknowledgement that somewhere in all this must be a solution to the hard problem, where the only thing that's going on in their model is a description of neural processes. So is this basically him? I think you mentioned something before the first time. This is basically him saying, attempting to sort of, I don't want to say demystify it, but saying, okay, here's the neural processes, but there has to be more than that as well. It's kind of, it's a little peculiar to look at this because how I actually heard it is now like jarring with what I'm seeing on the paper. So I apologize. Okay. I don't know if we want to talk more about the classic metaphysics, but that's assumption 2. Do you want to continue, or do you want to jump to any particular point in the paper? I know you kind of led the discussion last time, Amanda, so perhaps you can.
Last time we just kind of jumped around. I had skimmed a lot of it because it's kind of difficult. Okay, here's his melody analogy. The flow can be compared to a melody where each note permeates the next. So a moment in the series is incomplete without the whole series.
I think that's also interesting in the sense that there's sort of a like why does that experiment where you can take different people from all over the world with different languages and stuff, and they won't be able to understand language, but if you do like a bum bum bum, the next note's going to be bum, the sequence and the orders that way. There's sort of like something about the implicit structure of what's able to be interpreted as like there's a means by which the division of whatever is being transported through the medium has some kind of relationship to what's around it. Yeah. Motion, he argued, must be treated as indivisible, where per Zeno, Achilles successively has the distance to the tortoise. It is this track in space, the infinite is a line of which we think. Rather, Achilles' motion is indivisible. He moves with indivisible steps. He most certainly catches the tortoise. Per Zeno, the arrow always being coincident with a static point on this infinite divisible line never moves. But the arrow, in fact, moves in indivisible motion.
Yeah, that's a really interesting response to the paradox, to say that it shows that you can't, what we've been saying, that you can't break down the series into, you can't break the whole into chunks because of this thing about time. That's a very unique response to Zeno's paradox.
I think there was a very interesting, and I don't remember the dates of it. I think we talked for a little bit last time also about, or maybe we just alluded to it, but kind of the discrete versus continuous dichotomy too. I don't remember how to bridge that yet. Motion now becomes immobility dependent purely on perspective. All real concrete motion of the matter of field is now lost. But Bergson argued there must be real motion. So this is still Bergson saying, yeah, okay. From this perspective, there's a primary memory. It is the property of the matter field itself and of its melodic motion. This primary memory underlies the motion of the rotating cube, even the motion or flow of the neurons in the brain. The motion of the field, which is the rotating cube, is just a phase, does not consist of discrete instants that fall away in the past or in a non-existence. For this reason, the brain, as a reconstructive way, was able to specify a past transformation of motion in the mental field. The brain can specify rotating cubes or the singing notes of violins. We're always viewing the past. Perception is always already a memory. Yes, yeah. So to answer Gibsonian, Gibson's question, there's no dividing line. Yeah, okay. The third assumption is to common literature. I don't know if we talked about this a lot last time or not.
Yeah, so he offers more specific objections to this theory of memory he describes at the beginning, which is like basically that memory is like the activation of a certain part of the brain.
Okay. The two-stage recollection model, okay.
I remember last time we were hung up on him saying that like neural oscillations aren't temporal in the right way. That's supposed to be the core of his objection to this theory of memory, where it's neural activation. It's when you're like the memory is stored in a location and then that bit is activated. And he says something like neural oscillations aren't temporal. And we're a little confused by that. I don't have any new insights.
Yeah, so I think this might be where he says it here. It's just what we said. This metaphysic, and I guess he's still referring to the classic. This is still in part. This is still an assumption to the classic metaphysic. And at the end of it, he's saying this metaphysic is the very reason why our theorists are seeing the need for storing the past in the always present brain, else it to lose non-existence. But the brain too, with its neural oscillations being matter, only has the existence, the time extent of the present, of a mathematical point. Neural oscillations therefore can have no time extent either. Let me have to adjust my screen because it's getting a little intense for me. Just like okay, sorry. They cannot be employed to explain the perceived continuity. This is the standard blindness or the failure of consciously aware of its own metaphysics, the incoherence that plagues memory theory. The classic metaphysics is the cause for the motivation for the need for storing experience in the brain. Ignoring this classic metaphysics, say via the handy blank, is then used to explain time extended perception. Having your cake and eating it too makes for comfortable theorizing. It does nothing for clarity of the problem. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think actually I spoke about it. I think I spoke about this so much better on like either I think Friday when we were just recapping it because it was so much fresher in my mind. And now looking at this again, looking at I wasn't looking at the paper at all. So then looking at the paper and trying to parse the actually like more intelligible discussion we had, it's so it's hard. So good job, Amanda, for like making it really coherent to have a conversation about this at that time.
I don't feel like I'm doing a particularly good job, but thank you.
It feels so much harder right now. I'm sorry?
So I was going to say, I do want to check out more of his YouTube videos. He has a whole channel dedicated to this.
Oh, yeah. I would, if you want me to bring up some that we can. I remember we were basically at, okay. Perceptual information. As a I think we talked about this too. As a student of Bergson, I readily admit that this aspect of Bergson and aspects includes imagination, model of voluntary action, reaching truth, is the most difficult, sitting as it does on the interface of mind and body, despite the resolution he offered in this mind-matter relation. Even he recognized that the more theoretical insight was needed. But if we have no theory of perception in the first place, heavy rock throwing is done from a very precarious platform. Okay, so he's saying, careful what you're challenging. Okay. Explicit memory. Sorry, the problem. Okay. It is now very strange. It creaks and groans, blah, blah, blah. Finding to phenomenology, detailed experience in HPC, only a fraction of experience is stored. What we are seeing is verification of Bergson's at least as much. Whether experience is stored in the brain is critical to the problem of consciousness. Are you storing every instant of ongoing perceived event? The rotating cube, the stirring coffee. You must do so in the storage model, given its metaphysics, where each instant moves into non-existence. You must. So yeah, it's kind of we're getting a little more, I think, zooming out a little bit and getting his sort of, is it, are you like storing everything like a big, hard drive and just putting stuff into it, or are you moving this to this, this other stuff, this perception, experience, with consciousness stuff? But are you disassembling these events into static features, storing each feature in a short-term memory? Then what happens to the invariant structure? And still doesn't help you. You can't explain continuity. Yeah. So this is we recognize. Perception is experience, is consciousness. A theory of memory must be a theory of perception. Mm-hmm. would we have seen RE, current theory? I remember we got stuck on this last time. What does that mean? This is where we left.
Regarding the current theory?
Is there's yet little idea how experience is stored. Okay. There's yet to be an engagement with the dynamic structure of events experience, and see actual engagement will clearly make how experience is stored very more problematic. And add in RE current theory. It ignores Gibson's stuff, its consolidation, its fragments are stored, highly superior autobiographic memory, unintegrated theoretically, an anomaly. Its features of object events, okay, the frame of the problem is lost as AI. I don't remember what the problem with that. Its theory of explicit memory is a problem of consciousness. Missing. And is there it's static, a static world that doesn't actually exist. Okay. Yeah, okay. I had some comment last time about that the perception of things being static is a very interesting illusion, if you will, and how it's interesting that like I see Robbins trying to kind of come from that standpoint here and attack this. So the reality in my estimation, theory is being driven too far to a far different model. And now we're going to find out what the alternative is. Okay. Okay, yes. Perception, thus external event, is not occurring solely within the brain, therefore it cannot be stored there. So things are happening in the world outside the brain. A second element, the time extended coffee stirring event, is simply part of the ever transforming holographic field, is indivisible flow or motion. All right. And then this is sort of where I'm a little bit, I feel like I'm super bouncing around here, and I'm not sure if we want to like be going through this or where we want to pick up. This is sort of, we kind of got to this point about resonance. We got to this point about, this commentary on Sheldrake stuff. But I don't know if we want to get into any of these things up here before just moving on to that.
I felt like I had a decent grasp on what perception is supposed to be with this hologram model. But then memory, like episodic memory of a particular thing in the past, is supposed to be resonance with this virtual world of the past. And that's where I was lost. And he does admit that like Bergson's use of virtual is, that's its own topic of study, trying to interpret what that is. But that lost me.
Yeah, and like I know we could try to parse this out a bit more, but I mean that causality, object, space, time. There is, as described by Piaget, a dynamic developmental trajectory over 2 years that the brain requires to achieve this complex and correlated ability depending on, as he termed it, the conscious localization of events in the past. Explicitly reminded of playing with the grasshopper or this analogy. Complex as this trajectory is, there must be a points for breakage via neural damage. Okay. Okay. Here. The most fundamental operation of event retrieval is redintegration, a term coined already in long ago, by Wolff, a disciple of Leibniz, in his book. It's defined roughly as a part of a current event retrieves the whole of the past event. Or
That's
what's that?
I thought this was interesting. This made sense to me.
As Klein puts it, a pattern in a current event retrieves a past event with a similar pattern. A bolt of lightning strikes and I'm instantly reminded of my childhood house being struck. A rustling motion in the grass reminds me of the snake that once slid by me. One could recount here the history of theories of redintegration for the past several years, from verbally learning to connectionism. Their obvious neglect, as we have already seen, has been any attention to actually describing, addressing, or employing these patterns of events, aside ignoring of Gibson and the invariance law defining events. So the law of redintegration in Gibsonian terms would be a current event E redintegrates a previous event E when E and E share the same invariant structure.
What does redintegration mean? It's up in this paragraph above. A part of a current event retrieves the whole of the past event.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's as simple as, part of the present reminds you of the past.
Okay.
So something about the present holographic resonance allows you to access this virtual past.
Does he talk about? There's no mention of interoception here, but I think you could probably have some draws to basically the phenomenological, even like basal effectivity. Just it's not just that the memory's happening, but the experience of the memory is sort of like tied to the kind of a link in time between the present and the past. And I think there's it's interesting sort of mental health implications from that, trauma and PTSD and everything else. But like the closeness, the linkages of those things is, the body keeps the score, as a book and a concept, but also like the body. And I think this is what he's trying to get at, like the distribute, like memory is distributed. Like it's not just in a couple, neurons A and B that are in this part of the brain, but more like there's a internal and an external state that kind of alignment, or the resonance. I think that's sort of in a very Fuchsian sense what the resonance is kind of getting at. But even if it's not, across quote unquote, time. Okay. So what's this figure? Okay, to illustrate with one other simple example, the experiments of these two fellows showed that invariance, a law describing the aging of facial profile, is a strain transformation upon cardoid, the figure. Originally, The subjects look at many pairs of generated profiles, judging each time with a pair which was older. Changing this to a memory task, the profile of a certain age can be included with a set of various items successively presented to a subject. On the recognition task, the face is now presented, transformed by a certain parametric aging value that is a new value of the strain information. Familiarity rating values can be expected to be a function of the strain value of the transformation. The further away from the original value, the less the rating of familiarity. So okay. Like, okay. Anyone want to offer interpretations of that one?
I did not. Yeah, no. That was not an illustrative example for me.
What are you talking about?
I don't really get what figure 4 doesn't really
So
mean anything to me.
it's supposed to show how you manipulate a certain variable in a memory task.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you blow up the image a little bit?
I guess you can see here, like this is like a child's face, I guess, and there's a medium and then a more mature face. I guess that's what it's getting at here.
So what it is they're putting it on a mesh, and then they're manipulating the shape so that the points on the mesh move with the shape change. So the idea is that there are these invariants that are like basically the transformation between those points, and that's the thing you're using as like, you know, if you're thinking about like an object, and you train, you know, your brain or your model on different objects, and there are different shapes, you're actually using those invariants, which are basically how that mesh is deformed, not the actual shape itself, to describe that thing. And so that's what you remember are those strain transformations. And then that allows you to generalize between faces or heads or shapes that are similar but not the same. And but that's totally dependent on like this time, this temporal or dynamic view, because you have a series, a lot of objects change shape as you go through time, and if you reduce it to individual shapes, you don't necessarily get the full. You can't necessarily understand what's going on. You have to have that temporal information, which is the stretching of this underlying grid. We talked about Darcy Thompson a little bit in Diva Worm this week, and that's kind of he did this where he put he took animal morphologies like fishes, and he'd put them on a transformation grid like this, and he'd look at different fish morphologies and describe the changes in fish morphologies by the change in that grid, how it's deformed. So if I put one type of fish on the grid, and I look at another similar type of fish, the difference between those two morphologies are these points that are you have landmarks on the morphology, like the eye or the tip of the fin, and they stretch out or shrink down depending on the different fish. You can describe all fishes that way, and if you have enough transformation points, and you can basically store that as a set of I guess strains in this case. So it's basically you can to describe this in terms of stress and strain at each coordinate point instead of the actual encoding the shape and then trying to generalize from that.
This implies, by the way, that any memory theory has a requirement to handle dynamic variation based on aestheticism's own invariance.
I get the sense that that's really the objection, is that a lot of the storage model of memory is like not dynamic, it's static. So it's like I get presented with things one at a time, they're independent events. I then encode some of that and I have to recall it later. So if I'm exposed to something briefly, I can encode some of that. And then if I get exposed to it enough times, I can recall the whole thing because I've taken enough samples of it to get a sense of what it is. But that doesn't allow me to extrapolate on time. And then I guess what he's saying is that there's this unique thing that you have to remember, which is the flow in time, or the flow and difference between things. And that's a Gibsonian thing, which is like Gibsonian invariants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's read this conclusion, I guess, and we can perhaps wrap this up. There's a problem of achieving an explicit conscious memory of an event localized in one's past versus an implicit memory which involves nothing such. Yeah, okay. Of course, there are numerous other questions, but the redintegrative aspect I have just sketched, and which requires Bergson's temporal metaphysics and perception framework, are but part of his overall memory model. For example, the distinction between motor memory, procedural, and in which matter and memory he held to be stored in the brain as neural modifications versus experience itself, which cannot be so stored in later corresponding episodic memory. This would be the difference, for example, between resultant motor structure and the many experiences of each practice session when a teacher was mad when it was storming outside. Let's see. The distinction, as Sharon and Scratcher noted, have been reflected by several other theorists to include their own System 1 and System 2. But I fear that when one studies closely Bergson's concept of the dynamic scheme, only initially foreshadowed in his book, or in Matter and Memory, even this motor storage becomes questionable. And though questioning constant with Lashley's discovery that no matter how radically it's been sliced, diced, scrambled, or threw away, as Morgan said last time, burn damage, not just something, but really, really messed around with parts of poor rat's brain. You cannot eradicate a learned behavior, say running a certain path through a maze. There's also Bergson's distinction between automatic and attentive recognition still needed today in and his model in the role of memory, image and voluntary action, also the role of memory in speech perception and listening, all of which become extremely important if moving to a new framework. But this last section has been but the beginning of a sketch of the alternative. The goal has been getting us to see that a storage problem exists and that it begins already in perception, the metaphysical origin thereof. Okay.
So he mentions Lashley's localization experiments there. So it's basically, I don't know if that's really a fair way to characterize it, but like basically you're removing parts of the brain and you're getting a deficit of something, but you can't necessarily eradicate the whole behavior running through a maze. So, I mean, that's, I guess, I don't know, Gunther 2012, or I don't know where this is cited, but yeah, I mean, that's maybe one example. Of course, there are other lesion studies that show other aspects. I mean, memory is a little bit more complicated than just eradicating, like, either you eradicate the learned behavior or not, because there are different areas where things get encoded. It's not just like you do it in one place necessarily, but that'd be interesting to kind of tease that out a bit more in terms of what other people have written on that. What is Gunther 2012? I don't know if you have. Okay, mind memory time. I don't know. Amazon Digital Services, yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, so that's interesting. So when he was talking, I wasn't here for the last time, so when he was talking about holograms, do you want to go up to the part where they start talking about holograms? And I'm curious about
weird.
Yeah. Well, no, I'd like to go through it to see like what they're referring to. I think I saw some things in there that were interesting.
So this is sort of where he starts talking about it, I believe.
Yeah, right there. So
Sorry.
Right there. Yeah. So okay. So we basically want to know, where are we? Go back up to this paragraph at the top here. Just scroll up a little bit.
Yeah,
Right there.
I'm a little lagged. Sorry.
Okay, yeah. There have been examinations of the lack of success in the historical effort to determine how experience is stored in the brain. I mean, you have Lashley trying to find the engram, which is localizing things, engrams of memory. We talked about that in a Saturday meeting. So, it's like finding the one place where it is. And that's, of course, there's been work since then, but it's like the idea is that there's this single storage site for one thing you can, find. And that kind of goes back to some earlier theories about how the brain is organized. But anyways, and so, Lashley's 30-year-long effort attempting to eradicate a memory via taking out pieces of the brain ended with this principle that there's no such place. This was extended by his student Carl Pribram in 1971 in his holographic model of storage. So this is like, I don't know. I mean, we'll get to it. So this is actually, every apparent storage site may turn out to be a perceptual processing site. This history of failure is an important aspect of the problem. And then they took up the Moscovich model, which is the traditional model of retrieval of memory. And that model gives and can give no incorporation of Lashley, as no connectionist network could withstand the damage ruthlessly inflicted by Lashley. Well, that's an interesting point to tie to connectionism, and they say that if you were to do a bunch of lesion experiments on a connectionist network, which, I don't know if people have done that, but basically you have a bunch of, in that case, you have a bunch of weights, and you have sort of these random layers, where the processing goes downward, and kind of, different layers kind of do different things, but the connectivity is, starts out kind of random, and then you get weights that characterize the network. So that's, kind of, if you started lesioning that, of course, you would find some deficits, but it's, is that something that would eradicate certain ideas or memories or concepts? It's hard to say. So anyways, that's an interesting point as an aside. But the engram search and storage search failures are more a symptom than a cause. So this is where we're looking at storage in like maybe a connectionist network or in a brain in certain locations. So then they want to go from that to something that employs Bergson and Gibson and their insights. And then going down to, I'm actually looking for, what is it, where they start talking about Gabor. Actually, look for Gabor. Gabor, yes.
Oh. Here, yeah.
There we go. Okay, so where? I don't see it. Oh, there. Okay. So then he talks about kind of Bergson talking in an image mode. That's chapter 1 of Matter and Memory. The coffee cup is an image. We do not see the real coffee cup, but its totality. So this is kind of going back to the, some of the, I don't know. Basically, you don't actually see the coffee cup, or you don't have to see it to recall it, or something like that. Cups, neurons, brains, atoms, all are images. So the image is the thing that, thus we spoke of the material world as the aggregation of images. This caused philosophers like Russell to simply assign Bergson to idealism, and Sartre to say that for perception, Bergson must begin all over again. And then, so then Bergson had anticipated the essence of Gabor's 1947 discovery of holography. So Gabor actually invented holograms, and if you've seen holograms, of course, the physical holograms, there are these, images that you can project through different types of lenses, and so it gives you like this image that looks like a three-dimensional object. So that was actually Gabor is a physicist who actually did, I think, some work on perception as well, but I'm not remembering right now. There's a famous thing called the Gabor filter. That image / experience of the coffee cup with the stirring spoon, it is a photograph taken by and somehow within the brain. So the idea that there's this hologram in the brain is really that the image is there, and you're projecting the image out into the world or something like that. Obviously, said Bergson, even the neuroscience of the day shows that there is no such photograph taken by or within the brain. But that, then he went on to say, if photograph there be is already taken, already developed in the very heart of things and at all points in space, no metaphysics, no physics can escape this conclusion. Build up the universe with atoms. Each of them is subject to the action, variable in quantity and quality, exerted out by all material atoms. Bring in Faraday's centers of force, the lines of force emitted in every direction. From every center, bring it to bear on each influence of the whole material world. And this just goes on about basically the universe. It almost sounds like a very early version of like simulation theory, in a sense, because it's kind of like you get this, this holographic mode of the universe where each point is sort of has information, and so it's interesting. But then, of course, going into Gibson, where Gibson is interested in motion, natural motion, other types of things, where you want to understand like how people perceive things in motion, and this sort of naturalistic sort of view where you're not interested in static images, or interested in the flow of things. So like Gibsonian approaches are kind of like, if I put you on the back of a train, and you're viewing the landscape, you're in motion and the landscape appears to be moving away from you. And that's actually an illusion, but the way your brain is interpreting that is the thing that's interesting. Not so much that you're processing the scene, you're processing the scene relative to your own motion. And so most of the time we're kind of moving around, or we have we always take different perspectives on the world depending on where we are. We might have things at a different angle, we might have things moving. So we have to, our perceptual system has to basically find the invariants of things. Instead of, storing the images, it's storing these pieces of, kind of transformation. So like if you have this flow field of something moving towards you or away from you, the objects are moving. You can store the objects, but that doesn't tell you anything about the world. It just tells you about the objects. So how do you know what the world is going? How do you anticipate, say, physics? Or how do you match your movements to the physics of the world? And then that's where you get this invariance thing. So it's interesting that he's kind of stitching all that together. And yeah. So I'm still not necessarily as clear on how holography is being kind of used here. I think it's almost like a combination of a metaphor and an actual appeal to holography, because it's like you do have like images, and maybe we store images, maybe we store invariants, maybe there's some metaphor, but also some sort of actual insistence that there are like that the brain is using a sort of a holographic method to store things. Yeah, I don't know. And then then he throws in the resonance part where it's basically resonating that information. Yeah. So what do we know about like well, we talked about resonance during when we talked in Fuchs, and he talked a lot about resonance, and the brain is a resonating organ. So I guess this is a question: how does this kind of play to what Fuchs was talking about?
The only thing that really comes to my mind is sort of like, I mean, he uses these things like the melody and violin, that stuff. But also, what came to my mind, and I said a little bit before, was sort of like, when it's having that thing about like, when you hear leaves rustle, it reminds you of the snake passing by your foot a while ago. I was like, I think the Fuchsian connection is what I said in terms of. I don't really know if this is what he means though, honestly. But in terms of Fuchs, it'd be like I almost see it as like an interoceptive based, like interoceptive basal effectivity, or just generic effectivity of like what was your internal state like relative to that memory, and sort of the memory being associated with the because of the indivisibleness of internal experience and external stimuli, there's a connection between that, and so the memory isn't just in the brain; it's in a whole, almost the perception, and as he's saying, perception itself is a memory. The perception, aka the perception, is associated with other perceptions, and the memory is associated with other memories that are kind of tied to it. So there's sort of an internal, facet of the memory, and even though the external memory is the external environment of the agent is different, there's a highlighted section of the environment which is triggering the same stimulus or giving the same signal, so it's triggering or resonating with an internal state, so it conjures the internal state. I don't really know that. I feel like this is more me putting together than me being really clear about what he's trying to say about that, though. Like I don't really know if that fits entirely with what Robbins is saying.
Well, I mean, it's I don't know. I guess I can't tell either, but but I think that's I think yeah. So I mean, the point is that you put together this 4-dimensional temporal structure, 3 dimensions of like images and shapes and things, and then you put the time information on there. And then there has to be some resonance there that allows you to. So it's almost like memory is kind of like resonance, and might be some recognition, but there's this, in the classic retrieval model, there's no role for resonance. There's no role for like dynamical information. It's just kind of like static information that kind of gets retrieved serially. So it's like, well, maybe that's enough. But maybe not. Maybe you need more than that. Maybe you need to have this sort of interaction with the dynamical state of the environment, this sort of resonance, and this feedback almost. Amanda, do you have anything to add?
I do think this is consistent with Fuchs. It seems like you can talk about the brain. So this paper focuses on how the brain resonates with particular features of the environment. And Fuchs discusses that as well. And I can see this just being the more rigorous picture of how that's supposed to happen in Fuchs's picture. And then Fuchs also talked about resonance with the body. That part would be a bit more puzzling to me about how is that the same kind of resonance? in like interoception or perception of the body. That complicates things because it seems like changes in bodily dynamics would change like the brain as a resonator instead of those changes being things with which the brain resonates, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like if you have different sort of, if you are doing like a dance or some sort of other type of set of movements, and you kind of move your body in different ways or oriented in different ways, it would affect how you kind of remember things or what the brain is able to do, which may be true. I don't know. I mean, like, there's this, we kind of take all these effects of like, context, and we put it in a box and we say, this is context. And we don't really unpack context. We just say things vary by context, or they're context dependent. And, yeah.
Good.
The Bayesians would simply just say that, you just have a different prior distribution, but, it could also be that you have, your context is actually, highly conditional, and you can, instead of having a prior set of priors, you have like a set of sort of contexts, and you could kind of treat it in the same way. So.
To put on my outlandish hat, I think one thing I like about the paper is the sort of metaphysic questioning. I think I'm interested. I'm not sure how I'm not either. The writing isn't as clear as it could be, which is very possible. Or I'm not just familiar with his work, because it's clear that like it's very to be sympathetic. Like it's very clear that this is part of something else. Like this isn't the whole thing. This is in a really deep dive to situate in a certain way, regardless of how well it's not. And I don't know how well I am. I'm sure I can be more informed about a lot of things. But I think the metaphysics part questioning of it is useful or interesting to the degree of like when I think about like cognitive science at large and even a lot of all the 4E stuff and our like what's after 4E stuff in cognition futures or what's next or how do we deal with what I feel like there's some tie between all of this and like the like the teleonomic data stuff, like teleonomic matter, and there's some things that I really like to talk about maybe in a week or two in terms of teleonomic matter as Krakauer is talking about it, whatever that really means. Yes, the original teleology paper too, and some of the finer points about negative feedback and goals and all these things like that, versus like I'm really curious, and I haven't had time. I've had a lot of things to do. I would really like to investigate more where Krakauer is going with complexity science as study of teleonomic matter, and how that, in that context, things like this paper kind of get at me in the sense of like. I think there's sort of a missing set of components at play. It's interesting. The Bayesian point's interesting, and I don't really know if this would just. I imagine people vested in that wouldn't really care what I'm trying to say here either, but more a sense of. I think there's something between. As I've said along at the very, I'll go back to this. When we kind of several months ago started on this whole memory thing, I kept saying, yeah, memory to me is a bit more like tracking across domains and almost a concert of various things in different domains being present. the sense here of distributed memory is interesting, and I think distributed memory, but there's also sort of something between what I was trying to say earlier, just more. I don't know how to say it yet, but not just internal memory in resonance, but also something to do with the external environment too. Whether is that just a bunch of priors or prior distributions? Okay, maybe, but I think there's also sort of there's things between the internal and the external states relative to the agent's internal external line. And I don't know what it is, but I think where I'm going with all the teleology, complexity science, stuff like that, I feel like there's some things to be there's something about the external world, particularly like I think it'd be really, and I don't know if anybody knows this, maybe somebody does here. I think it'd be really fascinating to know, or if it is at all possible to find studies that do other mammals or other animals, does their memory work the same way? Or are there parts of memory that are also tied to sort of the language or the prediction? The stuff in teleology, like complex behavior, is it dependent on how much coordination, how many, not coordination, but how many various coordinates can be synced together? Because then you get into, is there any ties into like the memory and prediction, memory and language and prediction, back and forth in time, and where is it? Because if it's and I'm very inarticulate trying to get to this point of, do animals that don't have the same capacity for prediction that we do have similar kinds of memory and stimuli and responses or not? I have no idea, but I'm curious.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's actually a good point. And the best answer I can give is that we have animal models that aren't like, mammalian memory is going to basically be very similar in terms of the way we understand it. But like if you go to like insects, or you go to marine invertebrates like Alicea, or even to C. elegans, you can have like different types of memory models. In Alicea, you have this gill response, which is adaptive, where they open their gill, and you can do like associative training on that. In insects, they do things like they track plumes of odors, they integrate spatial information, but in like bees and in fruit flies, in that they have these mushroom bodies, which are not, like hippocampal memory, hippocampal cortical memory, but it's kind of like integrated into one thing. Like, the spatial information and the sensory information are kind of integrated more so than like what we have in mammals. So in mammals, we have the hippocampus and we have the cortex, and there's a sort of indexing that people propose, like the model that we talked about here, where you kind of, I've heard it's described as sort of like a library, and the hippocampus is like the librarian, the cortex is like the library, or something like that. And then, but in mushroom bodies, that's not the way it works. It's much more integrated with, like, the sensory experience is integrated with the movement experiences are all integrated with the sort of spatial navigation abilities. So, and I'm not sure about the letter in that literature. I'm not really sure how people have dealt with that. Beyond just like the anatomy and like knowing like some behavioral experiments. And then like plume tracking, that's another thing that, you have like the sensory input, but also you have movement, and you have to coordinate that with spatial information. So that's it's another example. So I think, yeah, insects might be a good antidote to this, or however you say it, where you can actually look at this in a different way. It's a different system. They do kind of similar things, but it's different. enough, you could like really kind of test and say, what is the model of memory there? Is it different? Or, I mean, we could probably say it's the same because we think of memory that way, but it might be different. And why?
Yep. There's a lot there. There's a lot in some other things. I may have to go a little bit sooner than at 10 o'clock though. So maybe any final thoughts, I suppose.
No, I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
I'm as a little bit of a preview for next time. I'm deeply intrigued by a lot of, I guess, things like new ways of applying some stuff I'm learning in data science courses and otherwise. And I'd like to talk about them in a how can I do similar projects here, or almost even, to be even more honest, like I kind of just want to get experience collecting, collecting certain data sets, even if it's sort of NLP and bibliometric or like data mining papers. Because we have so many different arenas to do it in. Like I kind of want to just get used to doing that kind of a thing in different arenas. That's not all I want to do, but there's stuff here and there's stuff that like I'm wondering how to mesh those projects with something in like I mean, it's Wednesday night, so I guess for Cognition Futures theme today, I'm kind of agnostic about what we talk about in the midweek meetings. But like tying it to some of the methods project topics and seeing the different trends of certain, I don't know, you could say keywords, but concepts and so on. That might be interesting. But there's more I want to develop with that, and I don't have a lot of. It's very much in development, but something that I feel like would be a nice. I feel like there could be some kind of an applied data science, meta science like branch. I feel like there's a vision of orthogonal lab and maybe through Joe Pro stuff of the like where we have a lot of like a little bit more structured like the developmental Brainberg group or maybe just like simulation of simulating behaviors, the representational brain phenotypes, like that, and is like more actively doing some simulation work there. And there's also sort of this. I'm mentioning that because that's it exists pre-existing, but also sort of this like data science, or maybe not really data science. Meta science, I think, is the word I want to use. A branch of it too that I am on the cusp of knowing how I want to talk about, but don't yet know how to talk about. So that's on my mind, but maybe more ahead on those things.
Okay. Yeah.
Otherwise, I guess the next question is, it looks like we might not meet tomorrow. Do we want to meet tomorrow? What we want to talk about next in either meeting or either group, or what's ahead for us?
Let's skip tomorrow evening.
Okay.
There's a lot of Halloween stuff.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I forgot. I forgot it was
Halloween.
The best holiday according to some. So that's we'll skip tomorrow, and then I guess we'll talk and chat about what to do next. There's a lot of things I just I'm happy to kind of pick some things out, but we can. I'll try to nudge people to think what we're going to do next, specifically for Cognition Futures. So, all right. If you have things, put them in Slack. Otherwise, have a good one tonight, and hope your Halloweens go as well as they can go, and all that good stuff. Oh, another shout out though. If you want a really cool thing though, I'll post the Eric Leonardis thing video in Slack too, because that was really fun. Both like kind of body horror movie, but really good Cognition Futures stuff we're interested in, philosophy and all that. So good stuff, and all right, good night, everybody.
All right.
Take care.
Take care.
Sounds good. Talk to you soon.
Right.
Yep.
It's